It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and joining us to talk about her book, Living Memento Mori, My Journey Through the Stations of the Cross, is Emily DeArdo. Thanks for being here, Emily.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. I think people might see this phrase around here and there in the Catholic circles, maybe along with a skull or something like that. Can you explain what is Memento Mori?
Memento Mori is a Latin phrase which means remember that you will die or remember your death. And it's actually a pretty old Catholic practice. I think we have evidence of it going back to the 2nd century. And basically what this means is that our job as Catholics is to remember that we are going to die and that earth isn't our home, heaven is. Mm-hmm. So we want to live our lives in a way that reflects that and reflects our eternal goal, which is to get to heaven at the end of our lives. And
it seems like looking at Catholicism, you might think there's a lot of this morbid stuff. We pray with pieces of bones or relics. We have ashes on our face to kick off Lent. And then we have this specific phrase to make us think about death. Why do you think we do all of this?
I think that we do this for a couple reasons. I think, one of them is it gives our lives deeper meaning and connection in a way. A lot of the time, if we think that Earth is this all there is, it can be pretty disappointing, right? If we're expecting our lives to be, this wonderful, perfect thing. And so I think that remembering that there is something better, that there is a goal that we are working toward is a great way to give meaning, to our lives and give us sort of a goal that we're always striving for.
When did you first learn about Memento Mori as part of Christian spirituality?
I first heard of Memento Mori probably just a couple years ago. If I had seen the pictures, the paintings of, St. Jerome holding a skull or Mary Magdalene holding a skull. And so I always thought, well, that's interesting. But once I heard of the practice of Memento Mori from Sister Teresa Alafia, I thought, well, yeah, that makes sense. At first, it sounds kind of morbid and a little off-putting, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized, I've sort of been living that way my entire life, being aware of death and being aware of what we call the 4 last things.
Your particular situation, kind of a near-death experience, how has that affected you and your spirituality?
I think it's definitely given me an appreciation of life, of this whole adventure of living that we all, are so privileged to get. In my family, we always say that if you didn't go to the ER today, it was a good day. So I've always been attracted to the idea of redemptive suffering, right, and the idea that Christ suffered for us, and he's not out of touch with our suffering. He's not just above it and telling us just, well, too bad, that's how it is. He knows what it's like to suffer. And so from a very young age, I found that very comforting and relatable. And so I've always loved, the stations. And I've also had a strong devotion to the Eucharist throughout my life, just being able to have holy hours and, be before Jesus in his Eucharistic presence is very important to me.
And then your book also includes a journey through the Stations of the Cross, but kind of in a unique way. Can you explain how your devotion to the Stations of the Cross has evolved?
Well, I went to Catholic school, and so every Friday for a while, not just in Lent, we did the Stations of the Cross, every afternoon.
Oh, wow.
So I've always been very familiar with it. But as I got older and as my health deteriorated and I began to, lose more and more energy and function, I started to see the stations as something very personal to me because, the same thing happened to Christ as he goes through his passion. He becomes more and more debilitated. There are times where, we don't think he's going to be able to make it. And so I thought, well, Jesus could have stopped his suffering at any time, but he didn't. And that gave me strength to continue to go on. And it was very, very comforting to me.
How have you then talked about the Stations of the Cross in the book with Living Memento Mori?
So we use the stations as pretty much the spine of the book. Every chapter focuses on one station. And if you're not familiar with the stations or if you haven't prayed them in a long time, I do summarize each station at the beginning of each chapter. And then in the back of the book, I've written a Memento Mori way of the cross, which incorporates the idea of remembering your death with praying the stations. And I found that, these two things actually go together pretty well because obviously in the stations, Jesus is moving toward death. And, in our lives, we are always moving toward our death.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the suffering that you've endured has actually helped you in your faith and helped you to recognize and see mortality and kind of lean into the stations more?
Yes, I think so. And in the book, I do talk about how my experiences can connect with each of those stations. But, there are definitely times, especially with the three falls of Christ, when I think, okay, I've reached my limit. I can't keep doing this. It's good for me to remember that Jesus can relate to that. And so the falls are a very vivid station for me personally.
Can you give an example of how you share your journey with one of the stations?
So there are actually two chapters that I really like. Well, I like them all. But in chapter 4, that's station 4, where Jesus meets his mother. And my family has always had strong Marian devotion. We prayed the rosary as a family. We prayed it on the way to school in the morning. And in that chapter, I talk about my mother's devotion to Our Lady of Perpetual Help and how Mary helped her and helped me, get through a lot of the dark times in our experiences and showed how, Mary, she suffered with Christ. She suffered all sorts of things throughout her life. And so that Marian presence in our devotion was very important to us. And the second chapter is the 6th station where Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. And I talk about how there was a very special nurse in my life who always went out of her way to make sure that, I was comfortable, that I had what I needed when I was in the hospital, and, really went above and beyond the call of duty in very, very special ways. So like Veronica wiped the face of Jesus, knowing that she couldn't stop his suffering, but she could give him this comfort. So this nurse was to me and to my family. She could provide comfort even if she couldn't change the situation.
What do you hope that people get out of reading this book?
I hope that they realize that a life that has suffering, suffering of any kind, it might not be physical like mine. It could be emotional. It could be family problems. It could be financial, job related. A life that has suffering can still be a life of joy. Our suffering isn't wasted. God isn't trying to punish us. That, we live a life that has, both suffering and joy. And I think the suffering makes the joy greater. So I hope that people are able to take strength from the story and that it deepens their relationship with Jesus.
And this would be a great book for Lent. Is there a particular way you would recommend doing it? I mean, to maybe reflect on one chapter a week, or just read it like you would normally read a book, or is it a little more spiritual than that?
I've had some people that have read it say that one of the things they really like about it is it's a very easy book to just pick up and read, either chapter by chapter or to read a little bit before Mass. It's smaller than a normal paperback, so it's easy just to put into your bag or to take to church with you. It would be a great faith-sharing book for Lent because there are reflection questions at the end of each chapter. If you read a chapter a week, you probably wouldn't finish it before Lent was over.
Right,
but so maybe 2 chapters. It's open to a bunch of different ways of reading it and engaging with it, which I think is nice.
And you mentioned it's not just Stations of the Cross isn't something that we just do in Lent, and we can really reflect on this at any time. Lent being a very appropriate time, but if people want to read it at any other point in time, they're still going to get a lot out of it. And your story is fascinating, and I think the way that you weave the Stations of the Cross in here and kind of make them, I think, more relatable. Like, how can we relate to the Stations of the Cross? I think it's going to be really helpful for people. So where can people go to get a copy of it?
It's published by Ave Maria Press, so you can get it on their website. You can get it on any of the big bookselling websites, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I think Target even has it online. You can also get it at your local Catholic bookstore. If they don't have it, you can always ask them to order it for you.
All right. Again, it's called Living Memento Mori, My Journey Through the Stations of the Cross, and the author is Emily DeArdo. You can also check her out, EmilyDeArdo.com. That's DeArdo, EmilyDeArdo.com. Thank you so much, Emily, for sharing a little bit of your story with us.
Thanks for having me.